Getting back to Canadian vlogs, and where do we start? First of all, if this video gets 1 million likes, I am going to run for Prime Minister. There, I said it. Viva Frei, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber, and it is time for an update on the SNC Lavalin Justin Trudeau scandal. Now, I've done a few videos on the subject, one of which was a detailed breakdown and explanation of the Ethics Commissioner report, concluding that Justin Trudeau violated his ethics by putting undue pressure on the Attorney General not to prosecute SNC Lavalin. I'll link that video right here. All that to say is that if you have watched my previous videos and remembered them, some of this may be a little repetitive, but it is necessary to put it all together in one video for proper understanding of what's going on. For those of you who don't speak French, SNC Lavalin is Sierra November Charlie, Lavalin, L-A-V-A-L-I-N. It is an EPC, an engineering, procurement, and construction firm, the largest by revenue in all of Canada, and employs over 50,000 people. As of 2012, it was embroiled in controversy relating to alleged fraud and corruption charges, and as of 2012, there were various criminal investigations going on to determine any alleged wrongdoing. While all of these investigations are ongoing, SNC begins rather aggressively lobbying the government to make changes to our Canadian criminal code. Those changes would include the amendments that SNC Lavalin were aggressively lobbying the Canadian government to make to the criminal code refer to something as DPAs, Deferred Prosecution Agreements. Deferred Prosecution Agreements, DPAs, are basically non-litigious ways of resolving criminal accusations. Basically, it's like settling criminal accusations without being convicted and without having a criminal record as a result. DPAs did not yet exist in the Canadian criminal code, and while SNC is under investigation for fraud and corruption charges, they are actively lobbying for the Canadian government to make these amendments to the Canadian criminal code for obvious reasons. Now, these amendments to the Canadian criminal code were in fact enacted into law in 2018, with one important caveat to the drafting. For greater clarity, under the criminal code, deferred prosecution agreements are referred to as remediation agreements. And the conditions under which the prosecutor may enter into a remediation agreement are provided for at section 715, what's the paragraph? 715.32 of the Canadian criminal code, and it reads as follows. The prosecutor may enter into negotiations for a remediation agreement with an organization alleged to have committed an offense if the following conditions are met. And you can read through them on your own. What is of particular interest here is not only the factors to consider that follow, but rather the factors not to consider that were specifically included in this provision of law. Factors not to consider. Despite paragraph 2.1, if the organization is alleged to have committed an offense under section 3 or 4 of the Corruption of Foreign Public Officials Act, the prosecutor must not consider the national economic interest, the potential effect on relations with a state other than Canada, or the identity of the organization or individual involved. 2018 C12 section 404. Now, why I focused on that blue text 2018 is to illustrate that this provision of law only came into force in 2018. This amendment to the Canadian Criminal Code was made after years of lobbying by SNC Lavalin while they were under investigation, and even though the amendment was made, a specific carve-out was included in the provision. And for those of you who don't know why I'm pointing at my computer screen, which is right here. And no, that was not a paid product placement by GoPro, that's just a sticker I have on my computer. Despite the years of lobbying, a specific carve-out was included under the remediation agreement, providing specifically that when a prosecutor is deciding whether or not to enter into a remediation agreement, this is something they must not consider. They must not consider the national economic interest. They must not consider the potential effect on relations with a state other than Canada. And they must not consider the identity of the organizations or the individuals involved. That carve-out was ostensibly drafted specifically to respond to the lobbying of SNC Lavalin so that they would not get blanket protection under this new provision of law. So that is the amendment to the Canadian Criminal Code made after years of aggressive lobbying by SNC Lavalin while they were under investigation and while they knew what was about to come down on them. Enter into the picture Jody Wilson-Raybould. Jody Wilson-Raybould was appointed MOJAG, that is the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, from 2015 to 2019 under the Justin Trudeau administration. She was the first female Aboriginal to ever hold that position of office, and I'm not saying this to play any form of identity politics, I'm saying it to illustrate the fact that when she was appointed, it was touted by Trudeau and his administration as being one of the big breakthroughs in Canadian government. Jody Wilson-Raybould served as MOJAG, Minister of Justice and Attorney General, from 2015 to 2019 when she was demoted to the Minister of Veterans Affairs. Now, I'm putting the word demoted in scare quotes not to demean the Minister of Veterans Affairs. I am using that term only to illustrate that Jody Wilson-Raybould was taken from the position of MOJAG and placed as the Minister of Veterans Affairs in the context of this entire scandal, which we're going to get into now. Oh, and incidentally, Jody Wilson-Raybould resigned in February 2019 once this entire scandal hit the fan. The Minister of Justice advises the federal government on policy while the Attorney General decides who gets prosecuted. And so to that extent, the Minister of Justice sort of answers to the government, whereas the Attorney General operates independently of the government. The Attorney General benefits from what we refer to as prosecutorial independence, in that they make decisions without any influence or interference from the government, as opposed to when they're wearing their hat of Minister of Justice when they answer to and serve the government. Now, there has been and will continue to be discussion as to the inherent conflict of interest of one and the same person both serving the government and acting independently from it. But that is what the Mojag does, and that is what Jody Wilson-Raybould did from 2015 to 2019 when she was demoted from Mojag to the Minister of Veterans Affairs after having done what we will get into now. To simplify a complicated matter, in 2018, Jody Wilson-Raybould, in her capacity as Attorney General, is determining whether or not to enter into a deferred prosecution agreement with SNC Lavalin. Deferred prosecution agreement, remediation agreement. Recall now that the criminal code has been amended to allow for this type of agreement. However, recall the factors specifically not to be considered by the prosecutor in determining whether or not to enter into a remediation agreement. So Jody Wilson-Raybould is determining whether or not to move forward with criminal charges against SNC Lavalin. She begins to receive what she feels to be a substantial amount of pressure from the Trudeau administration, Trudeau himself, and members of his cabinet. Multiple meetings to the effect that they should find a remediation agreement one way or the other. Trudeau and members of his cabinet pressuring Jody Wilson-Raybould to enter into a remediation agreement, illustrating the fact that if they don't, it could have disastrous effects on the company and the economy. It could result in the loss of tens of thousands of jobs, etc., etc. Factors specifically not to be considered by the prosecutor in determining whether or not to enter into a remediation agreement. Despite all the pressure, Jody Wilson-Raybould ultimately determines that they will move forward with criminal charges against SNC Lavalin. Subsequent to her decision to do that, she is swiftly demoted to the Minister of Veterans Affairs and then resigns in February 2019. And this is when we get into the whole identity politics aspect of the entire scandal. Justin Trudeau appoints the first female Native American person to the role of Mojag, only to demote them when they do not heed to his pressure to do what he says. The scandal hits the fan when Jody Wilson-Raybould resigns in 2019. Yeah. Okay, 1 second. The scandal hits the fan in 2019 when Jody Wilson-Raybould resigns. Media outlets begin picking up the story and running it. August 2019, the Ethics Commissioner releases something like a 40-some-odd page report concluding that Justin Trudeau committed various ethics violations, putting undue pressure on the Attorney General, trying to influence the Attorney General's decisions, which ought to benefit from prosecutorial independence. Check out my video where I explain the Ethics Commissioner's report, but it is a bona fide legal scandal. Trudeau's rationale was that he did what he did to save jobs, to help the economy, notwithstanding the factors not to consider specifically included in the amendments to the criminal code. Anyhow, that was all a lead up to the news that just broke last week. SNC Lavalin's Executive Vice President Sami Babawi was just found guilty on 5 criminal charges. Those 5 criminal charges are fraud, bribery, laundering the proceeds of crime, and 2 counts of possessing property obtained by crime. Alright, and I am running late to a meeting, so I'm gonna have to finish this vlog in the car, so be right back. Apparently, the fraud and bribery consisted in paying off Libyan officials to secure the contracts, opening offshore bank accounts to launder the money through for the purposes of paying off the officials, and apparently Babawi pocketed something like $26 million for himself. Now, all of this information came from co-perpetrator turned star witness Riyad Ben Aissa. Ben Aissa had pleaded guilty in Switzerland to corrupting a foreign official and laundering, and then struck a deal with the prosecutor in the Canadian case to become the key witness against Babawi. And then, predictably enough, in the days following Babawi's conviction, SNC Lavalin pleaded guilty to charges of corrupting foreign officials and fraud and was issued a fine of $280 million. And after all of my research and reading into this, I'm asking myself, what is my takeaway from this entire situation? My takeaway is that the system has become so corrupt, people are sometimes unable to determine whether or not something is corruption or good politics. Is it good politics or is it corruption that a company like SNC Lavalin, with its finances and influence, can actually lobby certain changes to the criminal code? Is it corruption or good politics to pay off certain officials in order to secure lucrative contracts in foreign countries? Is corruption-free business even possible in certain countries? But setting aside the question of foreign countries, when it comes to our own government, where is the line drawn between good governance and corrupt governance? I think we as the people have become not only desensitized, but fatigued with what we see to be systemic, inherent, and unchangeable corruption. There's a phenomena in psychology that when you become overwhelmed with something, you just shut down. And it seems to me that we as a people have become so overwhelmed with corruption, we have just shut down to reacting to it. It has become so systemic, we have just relinquished ourselves to accepting it, and that is a big, big problem. I find that the more I understand of the actual law behind these scandals, the more shocked I am. The flip side being that sometimes these legal realities are too complicated for most people to understand, and they just simply shut down and accept it. In any event, that is the rundown of the SNC Lavalin scandal. Now you know, and you can come to your own conclusions. What do you think? What do you want? What do you expect from government in general? Mark Twain, history doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes, so I suspect that this type of corruption has been around since government has been around. I suspect this type of corruption has been around since the age of the caveman. Certain highly influential cave people in the pack able to secure the better piece of the mammoth for themselves. Power corrupts, and it corrupts very quickly when people lose their moral compass, if they ever had one to begin with. Alright, and that is it. I've got to get to my meeting, but if you like my video, be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, drop a comment in the comment section below. If this video ever gets to 1 million thumbs up, I think I will take that as a sign to run for Prime Minister, and I will do it. Mark my words, if this video ever gets to 1 million thumbs up, I will be running for Prime Minister of Canada. There, I said it. And now you know your vlog. Peace out. Booyah.